What if the life you're living is simply the echo of what you're putting into the world? Jordan didn't believe in karma. Not really. Not until life hit rock bottom and nothing made sense anymore. Over 2 years, through small changes, painful truths, and powerful shifts, Jordan slowly rebuilt a life rooted in intention, healing, and self responsibility, guided by the 12 laws of karma. This is not a story about overnight success. It's about real change. One step, one choice, one law at a time. Part 1. Rock Bottom. Jordan always thought life would eventually get better on its own. That maybe if they just kept their head down, worked hard enough, and stayed out of trouble, something good would finally happen. But by the time 38 rolled around, the only thing that had changed was the weight of disappointment on their back. They worked 10-hour shifts at a warehouse, came home to a cluttered apartment, and numbed out with greasy food and TV reruns. Most days, they barely spoke to anyone outside of the job, and when they did, it was usually laced with sarcasm or exhaustion. One rainy Tuesday, Jordan blew up at a new coworker, someone just trying to help, but their fuse was too short, their patience worn thin. That night, sitting on the edge of their unmade bed, Jordan stared into the cracked mirror above their dresser. The person looking back was tired, bitter, and barely recognizable. Scrolling through their phone to escape the shame, they stumbled upon a short video about the great law of karma. Whatever you put out into the world comes back to you. The words echoed in Jordan's head like a warning and a whisper of hope. What if all this time they had been pouring negativity into the world and receiving it right back? That moment didn't change everything overnight, but it cracked something open. Jordan made a silent decision. If their life was a reflection of what they were putting out, then maybe it was time to change the energy. No big promises, no wild declarations, just the tiniest flicker of willingness to try. That night, they put their phone down early, washed their face, and made the bed. For the first time in months, they didn't fall asleep angry. Part 2. A Spark of Change. Change didn't come in a thunderclap. It arrived in whispers. Jordan started with small shifts, holding the door for someone at work, actually making eye contact and saying, "Good morning," picking up trash near their building instead of stepping over it. These tiny choices didn't cost anything, but they made Jordan feel more present, more human. That's when the law of creation started to take root. The law says life doesn't just happen, it responds to what we create. Jordan had spent years waiting for their big break, for someone to discover them, or for their situation to magically improve. But now they were starting to understand. If you want a new life, you have to build it. One Saturday, while cleaning out a box of old notebooks, Jordan found a short story they had written in their early 20s. It was rough around the edges, but the passion leapt off the page. They remembered how good it felt to write, how free and fearless they used to be. That afternoon, they sat down and wrote for the first time in years. The words didn't come easily, but they came. Fueled by this tiny creative fire, Jordan also started speaking more honestly with people around them. They even reached out to their ex to apologize for the part they played in their messy breakup. But that conversation didn't go as planned. Their ex reacted coldly, and Jordan was left feeling exposed and defeated. That's when the law of humility became clear. You can't change what you won't acknowledge, but you also can't control how others receive your truth. Jordan realized they were still carrying the need to be validated. They had to shift from seeking forgiveness to simply living with intention. Even missteps were part of the process now. Part 3. Inner Work. By now, Jordan had tasted enough small wins to believe change was possible, but that didn't mean it was easy. The outer shifts were manageable, writing a few times a week, walking more, keeping the apartment clean. But inside, that was a different story. There were old wounds that still stung, regrets that surfaced when things got quiet, and patterns of self-sabotage that crept in every time progress was made. Jordan signed up for low-cost therapy at a local clinic, something they had avoided for years. Sitting on that couch for the first time felt like stepping into a spotlight, uncomfortable, raw, but also strangely relieving. Over those next few months, Jordan started unpacking the emotional weight they'd been carrying since childhood. The feeling of never being enough. the unresolved grief of losing their father young and the walls they built around their heart after betrayal. That's when the law of growth clicked. Real growth begins inside, not out there. It didn't matter how many changes Jordan made in their routines if they didn't deal with what was happening internally. Healing wasn't about changing other people or fixing the world, it was about evolving themselves. They also faced a hard truth. They hadn't always shown up as their best self. The law of responsibility teaches that you are accountable for your actions, no matter what happened to you. Jordan started to own their role in past conflicts, not with shame, but with clarity. They wrote letters they never sent, had tough conversations, and even approached the coworker they had once snapped at, offering a sincere apology. To their surprise, the coworker smiled and said, "It's all good. I've seen the way you've changed." Each layer Jordan peeled back brought more light. They weren't just improving, they were healing. Part 4. Unseen Connections. One quiet evening in October, Jordan sat curled up with a mug of tea, flipping through an old journal they hadn't touched in years. Between the scribbles and grocery lists, they found a folded story titled The Last Letter. It was written during their senior year of high school, messy, dramatic, and full of heart. Reading it brought back a flood of memories, especially of their English teacher, Mr. Evers, who once said, "You've got a voice that people need to hear." Spurred by the moment, Jordan found the courage to email Mr. Evers. They didn't expect a response, but within 2 days, he replied with warmth and encouragement. "I'm so glad to hear from you. Keep writing. The world needs stories like yours." That email stayed with Jordan. It reminded them of the law of connection. Everything in life is connected. The past, the present, the future. That story, that teacher, that one sentence from years ago, it was still rippling through their life. Jordan doubled down on writing. They created a small blog, anonymous at first, and posted a short story every Sunday. They didn't care how many people read it. What mattered was showing up. That's when they began applying the law of focus. You can't think about two things at once. When Jordan wrote, they stopped worrying about rent, relationships, or the what ifs. It became their meditation, their sacred hour. Distractions still came, of course, scrolling through socials, comparing themselves to others, procrastinating. But Jordan started catching themselves. They began setting time limits on apps and choosing intentional mornings over rushed ones. Focus wasn't about being perfect, it was about being present. And every time they chose the page over the noise, Jordan felt like they were slowly rewriting their life. Part 5. Walking the Walk. By now, Jordan had built a rhythm. Morning walks, writing at nights, and therapy once a week. The weekends were spent cleaning, cooking, and sometimes doing absolutely nothing, without guilt. The chaos of their former life had quieted into something steady and sacred. For the first time in years, Jordan didn't dread waking up. They joined a local writing group that met every other Wednesday at the community center. It was diverse: college kids, retirees, parents, artists, and a few dreamers like Jordan. Sharing their stories aloud was terrifying at first, but the group was kind and encouraging. They even asked Jordan to mentor a teenager named Milo, who wrote dark poems and rarely made eye contact. Jordan hesitated. "I'm still figuring this out," they said. But then the law of giving and hospitality echoed. You must practice what you claim to believe. If Jordan believed in healing, growth, and creativity, then sharing those things wasn't optional. It was the path forward. They began meeting with Milo once a week at a cafe. Jordan gave feedback, listened more than they spoke, and found healing in the act of guiding someone else. Milo even said, "You make this feel possible." At the same time, Jordan wrestled with lingering resentment toward their ex, their absent father, and the friend who disappeared when things got hard. But the law of here and now reminded them, you can't live a full life if you're stuck in the past. One Sunday, Jordan visited their mom and asked about their dad. Really asked. They listened to old stories, painful ones too, and left feeling lighter. They also cleaned out a box of things they'd meant to donate for over a year. Letting go felt like reclaiming space, physically and emotionally. Every step forward made room for something better. And the life Jordan was living, it was starting to feel like their own. Part 6. Cycles and Breakthrough. Just when life felt steady, Jordan met someone, Tariq. He was charming, insightful, and creative. Their conversations flowed like water, and for a while, Jordan let themselves feel hope again. They went on bookstore dates, laughed over silly movies, and even talked about dreams and fears under the stars. It felt like something real. But slowly, old patterns crept in. Jordan began second-guessing everything. Texts left unread, overanalyzing silences, people-pleasing behaviors. They found themselves waiting for the other shoe to drop, bracing for abandonment that hadn't even happened. One night, after an awkward disagreement, Jordan ghosted Tariq for 3 days. When they finally reached out, Tariq gently but firmly said, "I care about you, but I can't walk through someone else's past." That hurt, but it also woke Jordan up. The law of change came crashing in. History repeats itself until you learn the lesson. Jordan saw the cycle clearly now. The fear, the overcorrection, the retreat, it was familiar because it was unhealed. This wasn't about Tariq. This was about wounds Jordan hadn't fully addressed. So they journaled, cried, and returned to therapy with fresh honesty. They didn't chase after Tariq. Instead, they wrote him a letter they never sent, thanking him for holding up a mirror. They also began tracking their reactions instead of reacting blindly. "What's the pattern here?" became their new mantra. They created a pause space, 5 minutes of silence before responding to anything that triggered them. Jordan wasn't perfect, but they were growing. And when an opportunity came to facilitate a workshop at the writing group, they said yes. Standing in front of others, leading with vulnerability instead of fear, was a breakthrough. Cycles weren't just repeating, they were unraveling. And Jordan was finally walking forward, eyes open, heart steady. Part 7. Seeds Bloom. Spring arrived quietly, but Jordan felt it differently this time. The blossoms outside their window weren't just pretty, they felt symbolic. Proof that something dormant could bloom again. And in many ways, that's exactly what was happening inside. One morning, while sipping coffee and checking emails, Jordan saw it. A short story they'd submitted to an online magazine 3 months ago had been accepted. It wasn't a big-name publication, and the payment barely covered groceries. But none of that mattered. It was validation. Something Jordan wrote, born from their healing and growth, would be read by strangers. And maybe, just maybe, it would move someone. Jordan stared at the screen in disbelief. Then they cried. It wasn't just about the story. It was about the journey. Every morning they got up and wrote, every time they pushed through self-doubt, every decision to show up instead of shrink back. This was the fruit. The law of patience and reward had never felt more real. Consistent action leads to meaningful results, even if it takes time. That month, Jordan also stepped down to part-time at the warehouse. It was scary. But between freelance writing gigs, a growing online audience, and their mentoring work, it was time. Time to bet on themselves. Their body felt lighter too. They'd lost 15 pounds, not from dieting, but from choosing to walk daily, cook more, and sit with emotions instead of eating through them. People started noticing the change, not just physically, but in Jordan's spirit. Then, one afternoon, a coworker stopped them in the break room. "Hey, I don't know what you're doing, but you're different. It's like you glow." Jordan smiled. They thought of all 12 laws they had learned, and especially the last one, the law of significance and inspiration. Your story matters, so live it well. Epilogue. 2 years later. 2 years can pass quietly, almost without notice, but when Jordan looked back, they could hardly recognize who they used to be. Not because everything was perfect now, far from it, but because they no longer moved through life numb, bitter, or waiting. They had learned how to participate in their own transformation. They had lived every one of the 12 laws of karma, not just as ideas, but as choices, over and over again. They still lived in the same apartment, but it looked different, warmer, simpler, lived in with care. There were sticky notes on the wall with affirmations, books stacked beside the writing desk, and a vision board with dreams that no longer felt distant. They still worked part-time at the warehouse, but now it was by choice. Mornings were for writing, afternoons for mentoring, and evenings for rest or reflection. Their blog had gained a steady following, and once a month, They taught storytelling workshops at the local library, not for money, but for meaning. One of their students, Milo, was applying to a creative writing program. Jordan wrote his recommendation letter with pride. The ripple effect of living intentionally had extended far beyond what they ever imagined. They occasionally thought about Tariq, about their ex, about the people who walked out or drifted away. But instead of pain, there was peace. Those chapters had helped shape the one they were living now. Most of all, Jordan had learned that change doesn't require perfection. It just needs persistence, honesty, and grace. As they sat under a tree in the park, journal in hand and spring wind brushing their skin, Jordan smiled. They had turned their pain into process, their process into purpose. And without even trying to, they had become the kind of person who inspires others just by showing up fully.